actually going to be reading the original Tommy Taffy. Then I will be reading the version of Tommy Taffy after the twins were born. So what about Tommy Taffy? He is pretty terrifying. Can you imagine him coming into your house? Well, this is the third parent, which is the original Tommy Taffy. Tommy Taffy. Written by Elias underscore Withrow. Elias underscore Withrow. So the third parent, can you imagine? I mean, we only had one parent or two parents at the most, maybe step parents, but what if there was a third parent that came into our lives when we were younger that took over for 5 years, claiming to teach us God knows what lessons, torturing us, torturing our parents. Well, my name is Matt, and my childhood, well, let's just say, was not normal. Not by any stretch of the word normal. Something happened to my family that is almost impossible to understand or explain, but I'm gonna try my best. In the 5 years that I spent in terror for my life, actually we all lived in terror, in fear. 5 years we will never get back. My father, Spence, was not a very strong man, both physically and mentally. He was this type of dad who often let our mother speak for the both of them. But having said that, he often was content to just go with the flow rather than go against it or alter it. He worked hard and dedicated his free time to his family. He made sure our needs were taken care of. His soft assurances, the unseen foundation of our family. My mother's name was Megan. She was the head of our house. She was outspoken, independent, and extremely loyal to all of us. She loved my father's quiet ways, and even from a young age I could see the chemistry flowing strong between them. Now my little sister, Stephanie, was a year younger than myself. Stephanie looked up to me, and my father always told me it was my responsibility to look after her. We got along as best as we could, even though I gave her all kinds of brotherly hardship. I did love her. sitting at the dinner table waiting for my father to finish cooking. It was his turn. It was his turn. That night, and my stomach roared for his rosemary chicken. My sister Stephanie lay on her stomach in the living room, coloring. Her golden blonde hair fell across her shoulders in waves, and she glanced up at me. And smiled. She extended what she had been working on, and I nodded, completely unimpressed. She sniffed at me and continued her sketch. My mother walked into the kitchen, pulling her hair back from her freshly showered face. "Everyone gone?" my father asked from the stove. My mother nodded. "Yes, Spence, the house is ours again. It is so much better teaching yoga, and the basement is so much cooler. I'm glad we finished the basement over the winter. My clients are relieved as well. It's a scorcher out there today. Mom, can you sit down so we can eat?" I begged from my spot at the table. My mother turned to me and laughed. "Matt, the hungriest 6-year-old this side of the Mississippi. Why don't you ask your dad to hurry up? He's the one cooking. I placed my forehead on the table's lip. "Dad, I'm going to die." Stephanie looked up from her from her coloring book. "Matt, don't be crazy. You're not going to die." "You're crazy," I muttered, not looking up. "No," she said, sticking her tongue out at me. All right, guys," my father said, turning from the stove. In his hands, he held a steaming platter of chicken. "Come sit down, Stephanie. The food is ready," I ordered my sister, the sight of the seasoned meat causing me to salivate. As she pulled herself up from the floor, my mother taking a place beside me, we all froze as someone knocked on the front door. My mother and father exchanged puzzled looks. My dad placed the food down on the table and told us all to hold on a minute. Groaning with hunger pains, I watched him walk to the front door. He peeked through the keyhole, and I saw him visibly tense up, his whole body cementing like a statue. "Spence, who is it?" my mother asked. My father slowly turned back and looked to all of us. All the blood drained from his face. His eyes were wide, and I saw fear dilate his pupils. He licked his lips and shot Stephanie and me a look. "Spence," my mom pressed, her face contorting with concern. No, this can't happen." "Oh my God, not again," I heard my father whisper, staring off into the middle distance. The door shook as another series of knocks echoed throughout the house. My mom stood, her voice crackling with contagious laughter and fear. "Spence, who is it? What's going on?" "I'm so sorry," my father mumbled, clutching his stomach, his face a pale sheet. I have to let him in." Before any of us could say anything else, my dad turned and opened the door. Dying sunlight blinded me hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. It's good to see you again, Spence. I watched as my father slowly backed away from the open door. A man entered our house and shut the door behind him. My young mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but even at that young age, I knew something was not right with this unexpected guest. He was approximately 6 feet, had a shock of golden hair cut tight along his scalp. He wore khaki shorts and a white t-shirt that said "Hi" in red cartoon font. But that was not what caught my eye. It was his skin. It was completely devoid of pores, a perfectly smooth, creamy texture that looked almost like soft plastic. His face was a pool of gentle pink, his mouth a cheerful cut along his cheeks, revealing a white strip of teeth. But they weren't teeth. It's really hard to explain other than it was just a smooth, edgeless row of white. Like he had a mouth guard on or something. His nose was just a slight rise out of his face, like a doll void of nostrils. And his eyes were twin puddles of sparkling blue shining out at us from the flawless, eerie face. They were wide, like he was in a constant state of surprise. And they shifted around the room to look at us in quick, jarring motion. His smile widened and he raised a flawless hand to us at the table. "Hi, I'm Tommy Taffy. Oh, it's so good to meet you." I noticed he didn't have any fingernails or skin defects. No wrinkles, no bruises, nothing. It was like he was a living, talking, human-sized doll. "Spence," my mother croaked, recognition blooming in her eyes. "Megan, it's going to be okay," my father said, voice shaking. "Let's just be polite to our new guest, okay?" The man, Tommy, cocked his head towards my father. My dad, he took a step back, raising his hands. "I mean, our new friend." The frozen smile never left Tommy's molded face. There was no humor in his strange laugh. It sounded like he was clearing his throat or imitating a really bad chuckle. It was too pronounced. Each syllable sounded too deliberate. My father forced a smile tight onto his face. I meant," he looked desperately at my mother, who offered him no help, her body frozen in absolute terror. "I meant, meet your new parent to kids." Stephanie, who was standing by. Our mother frowned. "He's not our dad, you are. Then why does he look so funny?" "Stephanie," Mom hissed, gripping my sister's shoulder. And Tommy laughed and walked towards the couch in front of Stephanie. Now, Oh, Stephanie, it's not nice to make fun of people who look different, is it? My sister looked at her feet, blushing. Tommy tousled her hair. It's okay, buck up, kiddo. We're going to get along just fine. I'm going to help your parents raise you. Such a big job being a mommy and a daddy. Sometimes mommy and daddies need help. Tommy turned to my parents, that ever-present plastic smile stretching his face. You see, I helped their mommy and daddies raise them. Isn't that right, Spence, Megan? Megan pulled Stephanie away as my father nodded nervously. That's right, kids, he did. Tommy smiled and turned to me. I was still staring at the table, taking the odd sense and scene in. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't know who this weird-looking man was or what he wanted. What he was saying and didn't make any sense to me, but my parents seemed to know this man. So I kept my speculations to myself. You must be mad, Tommy said, walking over to me. I didn't look at him, draining my eyes to stare at my empty plate. I suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. I could feel the strange man beside me, his presence filling my head. I licked my lips and felt my heart begin to race. I instinctively did not like this intruder. Something about him felt dangerous. Tommy proceeded to walk behind me, chuckling while his hands sliding over my slender shoulders. Oh, it looks like we have a shy one. That's okay, I'll help him with that, he said to my parents. His fingers dug into my skin and I winced, but kept my mouth shut. Don't touch him, my mother hissed, eyes going wide. Tommy looked up at her, mouth stretched. My dad outstretched his hand, alarmed. Don't be so rude, Megan. Tommy continued to stare at my mother, who nervously lowered her eyes. Are you staying for dinner? Stephanie suddenly asked, breaking the tense silence. The eerie doll man let go of my shoulders, one of his hands sliding across my cheek and into my hair. Oh yes, I'll be here for quite a while. And that was how Tommy Taffy entered our lives. At 6 years old, I didn't know any better than to seriously question what in the hell was happening, even though my parents acted unsettled at his arrival. Their constant assurances that he was a friend pushed away any lingering doubt I had in my mind. As the days turned into weeks, I began to grow accustomed to Tommy's presence in our house. My initial fears slowly receded to wary caution. I soon learned that Tommy didn't like company. Whenever my mother had her yoga classes, Tommy would pull her off into a corner and whisper something to her. I would watch all this with silent eyes. I would see my mother's face grow pale and she would nod, whispering back unknown assurances. Then Tommy would turn During the evenings, we would gather our family into the living room and give short lessons on how to be a good person. My parents never spoke during these talks, just sat next to us, nodding in agreement. Tommy told us not to make fun of others, to love our friends and enemies, and always help those in need. He told us that's why he was here with us, to help my parents raise us. That we could come talk to him if we had a problem at school or didn't know how to handle certain situations. It went on like this for a month, and that's when my mom lost it. August 1989. My father had just arrived home from work, and I was sitting at the kitchen table doing my homework. My mother was cooking dinner, and Stephanie was practicing her dance for an upcoming school play. She was going to be a ballerina and had 3 weeks to learn a few simple spins and twirls. She had been diligently practicing over the past few days, but I don't know, she just couldn't get it right. She was young and her temper was getting the better of her. And that's when Tommy decided to help her. He had been sitting on the couch watching her when suddenly he rose and stood behind my sister, placing his hands gently over her shoulders. "Let me help you, sweetie. Good." His voice carrying a cheerful note. My mother spun around from the stove, and I saw her visibly tense. She didn't like Tommy touching us. She gripped the wooden spoon in her hand until her knuckles went white, watching as Tommy crouched and cupped Stephanie's body with his. He took her hands in his from behind and grabbed her arms and waist. His cheek pressed gently against my sister's. "Tommy, let her learn on her own," my mother said, her voice shaking. Tommy didn't even look at her, just kept guiding my sister. I could hear my father coming down the stairs, freshly changed from a day at the office. Tommy spun my sister for the first time. She nailed the twirl, her little feet twisting her body in a complete circle. Tommy clapped his hands once and then leaned down and kissed Stephanie on the cheek. "Good girl." "Don't do that," my mother shrieked, dropping the spoon, her face draining of blood. I jumped in my seat at the table and swallowed hard. I didn't know why my mom was getting so upset. He was just helping her. I also knew deep down that it was a bad idea to yell at the new member of our family. It was the gut instinct of a child, a gentle warning that rumbled in my head. Tommy stood, stared at my mother, and laughed his evil, weird, My father was standing at the foot of the stairs now, frozen, unsure what to make of the confrontation. Megan, honey, what's wrong?" he asked. My mother's eyes never left Tommy. "Spence, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending everything is all right. We know what this monster is. We know what he did to our town all those years ago. I want him out of our house." My father's eyes went wide, panic blooming in his face. Megan, he licked his lips, eyes darting back and forth at all of us. "Don't be rude. Tommy has been a a big help. My mom grit her teeth. Stop that. Stop pretending we want him here. I can't watch this anymore. I want him out. Very slowly, Tommy walked into the kitchen and stood in front of my mother. He looked down at her, his perfect blue eyes shining like crystal moons. His voice was like frozen silk. Megan, would you come down into the basement with me? I need to have a few words with you. My mother took a step back. Get away from me. Get away from my family. You're not welcome here anymore. She turned desperate eyes to my father. Spence, do something. My dad raised his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I could see he was terrified. Stephanie watching from the living room, her lip quivering, eyes watering. I suddenly wanted to go comfort her, but I felt glued to my chair. Come on now, Megan. Just a quick word. Fuck you. My mom spat. I gasped, heart dropping into my stomach. I'd never heard my mother swear before. And honestly, it scared me stiff. Suddenly, Tommy grabbed my mother by the back of the neck, the smile never leaving his face, and yanked her into the basement. Spence, stop him, help me, my mother screamed, helplessly trying to remove Tommy's iron grip from her. Tommy shot my dad a look that froze him where he stood. I'm so sorry, Megan. We need to do what he says, he cried. Stephanie was now openly crying, hands at her sides, tears running down her face. I felt sick as I watched Tommy open the basement door and drag my mother down into the darkness. The door slammed closed behind him. All was silent for a few minutes, and then the screams began. I never heard my mother ever scream like that. Actually, I'd never heard her scream before, and the sound of her scream shattered me. My father ran into the kitchen and scooped me up into his arms, then snatched up Stephanie in his other arm. He marched us upstairs into his bedroom, dumped us on the bed. We sat huddled like that for hours, none of us speaking a word. My mother continued to scream. Finally, after a long time, way after sunset, we heard the basement door open. Mom's sleeping in the basement tonight, Tommy called out. March 1991. 2 years passed. And after that night, my mom never resisted or talked back to Taffy again. When she came out of the basement the following morning, I expected to see her covered in bruises and blood, but I could see no visible signs of violence. I was too young to understand what had happened, why my mother now walked with a limp and would for the rest of her life. She didn't say a word to my father for a month, and even then it was just enough to get by. I noticed my father crying a lot during those 2 years. I didn't know what was happening to my family, but I kept my mouth shut and obeyed the rules. Listen to Tommy. Don't talk about Tommy to others. Things went calm. During sister. If he thought we were happy, he seemed more relaxed. But that night my mother challenged him. That changed something. Every couple months, Tommy would assert his authority over my parents. He would test them, stretch the limits of their patience and nerves. Most of the time, my father and mother would humbly submit to whatever mind games he was playing. Most of the time, he would do or say something to Stephanie or myself. It always made me uncomfortable. Sometimes he would have us sit on his lap while he stroked our hair. Sometimes he would sing strange songs to my sister about love. Sometimes he would make us take a bath together while he watched. I always put on a brave face during these times. Stephanie was young. Still, she was as bothered as I was. It was uncomfortable, and I would look to my parents for guidance. With pale faces, they would nod silently, and I continued in whatever activity we were forced into doing. It was in the early part of 1991 when the next awful thing happened to my family. It was because of Tommy. He had pushed the limits once again. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and looked at my race car clock on the wall. The glow-in-the-dark hands read 2 a.m. I could hear something in the hallway outside my room. It sounded like someone crying. Where was Tommy? I checked the dark corners of my room to make sure he was not there, watching me sleep. When I was assured he wasn't, I pulled the covers away and slipped to the floor. I crept to my door and looked out into the darkness. I could see a figure sitting on the floor by my sister's closed door. A person. I squinted in the black and realized it was my father with his hands over his face. He was sobbing, his back against the wall. "Dad," I whispered. My father looked up and immediately shooed me back into my room. I stood there. As my eyes adjusted to the night, my father's face was a mess of blood and bruises. "Go back to bed, Matt, please," he cried. I took a hesitant step out into the hallway. "Dad, what happened to your face? What's going on? Did Tommy do that?" My father's eyes went wide and he shushed me. No, of course not. Don't say such things. Tommy is he's here to help us be a better family, that's all. I walked closer to my dad and froze as I passed my sister's door. I could hear muffled cries from inside. I could hear fear. "Dad," I whispered, pointing to the door. "What's wrong with Steph?" My father wiped a trail of blood from his lips, eyes watering, anguish stretching his features. "Come here, Matt." I crawled into his outstretched arms as something loud banged against the wall from my sister's room. I jumped to my father, curled me up into his chest. I could feel tears dripping onto my head as he fought back misery. "Tommy's in there, isn't he?" I said quietly. My dad sniffled. "Yes, son. Yes." I looked up into his bloody face. "What did you do, Dad?" My dad tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "He wanted to do something with your sister. I like I told him no. As he spoke, I realized I could hear my mother crying from the bedroom. My dad cupped his hand under my chin. We can't say no to Tommy, okay? Remember that. My sister screamed from her bedroom, a shrill, piercing cry that shook me to my soul. I gripped my father's arm. "Why is he here?" I whispered. "Why can't he just go away?" My father was silent a moment and then lowered his mouth to my ear. "Listen to me, Matt. This is very important. When you grow up, do not have children." He follows those with children. I shifted in my father's arms as something was dragged across the hardwood floor from the other side of the wall. My father grit his teeth, more tears spilling. "We don't know who he is or what he is. He came to our town when we were little boys and girls, just like you and Stephanie. Your mom and I lived 2 houses down from one another. Tommy infested our street. I don't know how. He was everywhere. Always. He would be at my house, but also across the street, and also at your mother's, at all times at the same time. I don't know what he wants, what his purpose is. He just showed up one day. He just showed up and would not go away. God knows my father tried." "Is that how Grandpa died?" I asked. I never met my grandfather. I just knew he had died years before I was born. My father nodded. "Yes, Matt. Tommy had to teach him a lesson. He had to teach the entire street a lesson. After that, why can't you just kill him?" I whispered over my dad's sobs. My dad brought his mouth closer to my ear, his voice barely audible. We tried everything. We burned him, shot him, cut him into pieces, but it never worked. He always came back, knocking at our door, and someone had to pay. Someone always had to pay. If we didn't follow his rules, someone had to pay. Tommy was our secret. He was invisible, an invisible monster hidden from the outside world. Deaths were covered up. Abuse was brushed under the rug because we knew if anyone said a word, Tommy would make it so bad for whoever had to face his punishment. I digested all this with the understanding of an 8-year-old, and the only thing I could think to say was, "Dad, when is he going away?" My father kissed the top of my head. 3 more years, son. My bedroom door suddenly opened and my father jumped, tumbling me out of his arms. Tommy stood in the darkness, his face perfectly composed, except he was breathing hard. His plastic-looking face scared me, his 2 blue eyes glowing out of the black. Tommy jammed a thumb over his shoulder at the now silent bedroom. "She's going to sleep like a log tonight." September 1993. We had 1 year left. 1 more year. I could almost see the desperation in my parents' eyes grow every day, begging the calendar to advance. We were almost through the nightmare. I thought a lot about when my father had told me that horrible night in the hallway. I thought about what he must have gone through as a child, what he must have experienced. I wonder how bad things must have gotten for Tommy to murder his father, my grandfather. I realize now that despite all the awful things Tommy was doing, my father's submission was keeping us alive. The agonized silence kept Tommy's wrath at bay. Looking back, I can't imagine the mental torture he endured during those 5 years. Stephanie didn't talk much after that night in March. I noticed her charismatic personality declined drastically, and suddenly she was an unsmiling, silent child. I don't think she understood what happened to her, and as she grew up, I think her mind slowly began to build a wall, blocking that night out from her mind's eye. My mother and father seemed to be extra compliant that last year. They engaged in Tommy's nighttime lessons with added enthusiasm, and my mother desperately made sure Stephanie and I reacted in ways that made Tommy happy. But I didn't make it out unscathed. Tommy was sure to make his mark on our entire family. I was sitting in my room with the door closed. It was almost dinner time and everyone was downstairs getting ready. I could hear Tommy laughing from the living room. I looked down at the magazine one of my friends at school had given me. It was a Playboy. We had pored over the pages at school, giggling and going over the naked women scattered throughout the magazine. I had never even seen anything like it. It was my first exposure to that world. It made my heart race in ways I enjoyed, and I felt something weird but pleasurable stirring inside of me. I had asked my friends if I could borrow the magazine, and he had let me. I dusted myself on my bed and pored over the nude photos. I couldn't believe women actually let people take pictures of them like this. I felt that stir in my crotch as I turned another page. My heart was racing and felt hot. My cheeks flushed. I was on the last page when I heard something from the doorway. "What you got there, Matt?" I whipped my head up, jumped, the magazine falling to the floor. Tommy was watching me from the door. I hadn't even heard him open it. "Nothing," I mumbled, snatching the Playboy up and shoving it under my pillow. Tommy walking over to me. I didn't hear you come in," I mumbled, blushing. Tommy reached over my pillow and pulled out the magazine. "Matthew, it's not nice to lie. I've told you that. Why were you lying to me, Matt?" I swallowed hard, heart thundering against my ribcage. I'm sorry. I trailed off miserably as Tommy thumbed through the pages. He glanced down at me. "Do you like this?" I knew I couldn't lie again. I nodded, my skin flushed, eyes on the floor. Tommy smiled and sat down next to me on the bed, one hand resting on my thigh. "Do these pictures make you feel good?" I didn't look at him as I nodded again. Suddenly Tommy slid his hand over my crotch and gave me a gentle squeeze. "Does it make your penis feel good, Matt?" I jumped, his touch scaring me. He removed No, no, thank you, Tommy. Tommy smiled gently. It's okay to be scared. Growing up is scary. You're going to be such a handsome young man. He stroked my cheek with his other hand, one now on my cheek, the other still grasping my crotch. Have you had your first kiss? Tommy, please, I cried, feeling tears begin to form in my eyes. Tommy pushed me back on the bed, and I was now staring up at him as he cupped my head in his hands. You don't have to be afraid of growing up, Tommy. There's a lot of good things to look forward to, and just think when you have children, I'll come help you raise them. It's going to be fun. Let me go, I whispered, openly crying now, his breath hot in my face. Tommy suddenly leaned down and kissed me, his lips engulfing mine. I let out a squeal of panic as I felt his tongue slip into my mouth. His grip tightening around my crotch, his mouth tasted of rotting fruit and decaying meat. A rush of filth that invaded my taste buds. He rolled his lips around mine and then pulled away and whispered, "Not going to get hard for me." I just cried, staring up at him with shocked, panicked eyes. Tommy smiled and whispered in my ear, "That's okay." He suddenly sat up, releasing me. "Come on, dinner's ready." Shaking, I wiped my face and let him help me off the bed. I wasn't hungry at all. July 1994. As the days marched closer and closer towards July, my family developed a silent, optimistic, a desperate plea to make this all stop, to make it all go away. My mother and father made sure there was no reason for another hard lesson. They bent over backwards for Tommy, begging through cramped teeth that we'd all make it to July without another incident. On July 3rd, we woke up to find Taffy was gone. 5 years to the day. We couldn't believe it. He had simply vanished overnight. We checked the entire house, my mother weeping tears of relief, joy that the nightmare was finally over. Checking every inch of the house 3 times again, we met in the living room, embracing one another as a family. Tommy had moved on. The sentence was over. My father called out of work that day, and we went out for 2 weeks to the beach. During those 2 weeks, I kept expecting to wake up with Tommy standing over me, that horrific smile on his face. But he didn't. It was over. My parents did their best to rebuild our family, fill in the cracks that had been made during those long years, and I loved them dearly for it. Unfortunately, some monsters just can't be forgotten. I don't know what Tommy Taffy was or where he came from. I don't think I'll ever know. What was his purpose? Why did he do those awful things to us? I pore over the possible answers until my head splits and I find myself crying. The memory's too much to dig up. Some things are just left dead in the past. But I haven't forgotten what my father told me in the hallway that awful night outside my sister's room. I'm 33 now, and I have remained unmarried and without children. As you see, yesterday my sister Stephanie gave birth to twins. Continuing on with Elias underscore with the row. This is the last, I think, in Taffy saga, but it is called the Taffy twins. Now I have not read this in order, so I kind of did a retro storytelling by starting with the last one first, but I did tell the third parent and this one not in order, so yeah, scratch that. Yeah, so we're just gonna get into it. So this is Taffy, the twins, by Elias underscore with the room. I put my phone down, sighing heavily. I had just been speaking to my father, Spence. He told me he was not going to make it to Stephanie's for Sunday lunch tomorrow. He sounded tired and worn out, but then again, he always sounded like that. I mean, can you blame him? I mean, with everything he's gone through in his life, and now the twins, I felt the same exhaustion myself. We had carried in our hearts for years. The memories that still clung to the back of our minds, the nightmares we had survived. He told me Mom wanted to go away, maybe to the mountains for a while. She wasn't doing well these days either. Seemed like every week she was trying a new medication. The nights were the absolute worst time. My father had quietly admitted this to me one evening. The tossing and turning, the fearful glances at the door, jumping at every little sound. For my father and I, the passage of time was not enough to erase the fear that was seared into our minds like a brand on a cow. Stephanie seemed to be doing the best out of the four of us. She was happily married and her baby twins were almost 3 months old now. She had named them Jack and Jill. She thought it was cute, and it was. At least when they were little. Her husband Louis was a good guy. He could take care of them, selfless, strong man who put his children and wife before anything else. I sat in the darkness of my apartment glancing at the clock. It was almost 11. I thought about retiring for the night, but instead I got up and poured myself a shot of rum. I downed it without even thinking and let the heat settle my worn mind. I got up to take a piss and heard my phone ringing from where I'd left it on the couch. Zipped up my pants, went to pick it up. I expected it to be my father again, but it was Stephanie. Why is she calling me this late? I thought to myself. Shit, immediately I'm going into full alert. I placed the cell phone carefully to my ear. Hello, Step. An eerie silence fell over the line for a few moments. Something rubbing against the speaker. Then my sister's voice trickled the line. Terrified and thin. Matt, my brow furrowed. Yeah, I'm here. Is everything okay? More heavy breathing than a thick whisper. Matt, he's here. I stood in the darkness, phone pressed to my head, eyes growing wide. No, Jesus Christ, please, no, 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 not again, not yet. Immediately I redialed Stephanie, but it went straight to voicemail. As I placed the phone down on the counter, I realized my hands shaking uncontrollably. I poured myself another, then another shot of rum, and threw it back and back again. Began to pace, trembling in the dark, mind spinning out of control. It was everything I had ever feared, but it was too soon. Way too soon. Fuck, I screamed, throwing my glass against the wall, hysteria splitting through my throat. Fuck. I collapsed on the couch and tried to call Stephanie again and again and again. It rang once, twice. This time, somebody picked up. Steph, tell me exactly what's going on. Are you okay? But there was no response. However, I could hear something in the background, muffled and urgent. Tears were forming in my eyes. Jesus, Steph, please tell me you are okay. Then a voice like gold silk. Hello, Matt. Oh, it has been some time, hasn't it? Recognition blasted through me like an icy wind, swirling through the depths of my mind and ripping apart every horror I had ever experienced. The bile lurched in my stomach and sweat broke out against my forehead. My voice is trembling. I asked in a whisper, Tommy. The laugh echoed like a dirge. The line went dead again. I stood up, clawing at my hair, vomit threatening my throat. No, this wasn't happening. Please, God, fuck, no. My stomach in knots, shaking, pacing, sweating. There was nothing I could do. I knew what was coming. 5 years of pure terror, horror, and unspeakable things were going to happen to my little sister's family. I couldn't stop shaking. It was uncontrollable. The voice on the phone opening up years of suppressed nightmares, tearing the chains and shattering the locks. I collapsed on my knees and vomited on the floor, unable to hold it back any longer. I stared at nothing, bloodshot eyes blinking rapidly. 5 more years. No, I screamed, pounding my fists on the floor, letting tears pour out of my eyes. I got to my feet and snatched my keys from the countertop. Stephanie only lived a couple minutes away. I wasn't going to let this happen. No, not again. I was not. I slammed the car into park, panting. Stephanie's house was lit up like a distressed beacon, but the drapes were drawn across the front windows. I couldn't see any signs of movement. No shadows, nothing. I wrung my hands, racking my brain. What exactly was I going to do? What in the world was I going to say? What the hell was my plan here? All I knew is I had to do something. I wasn't going to let my sister's family suffer like ours had. And what about Lewis? He would have no idea what was going on. He would fight back. Oh, no. Taking a deep breath, I opened my car door, the cool night hitting my face like a splash of water. My sister's street was dark, the quaint lines of single-story houses lining the road like blacked-out bricks. That It sounded like gunshots in the night. I pressed my ear to the door but could not hear anything through the thick wood. As I raised my fist to knock again, the lights in the house went completely black. I pounded on the door now, terror and urgency detonating into my chest like a bomb. Stephanie, it's me, Matt. Please open the door. If you can, please. Then I heard it. Suddenly the deadbolt turned. I stepped back as the door cracked open, breath rushing from my lungs like a discarded balloon. Two glowing blue eyes shined from the darkness. They glowed like crystals of fire. And then a voice, smooth as silky cream. A little late for a visit, don't you think, Matt? Staring into those burning blue eyes, hearing my name from his foul lips, it took everything I had to keep standing. Where's Stephanie? Are the babies? Where's Louis? I finally choked out, frozen on the front steps, unable to look away from his eyes gazing at me from the black. Oh, we are all here. Just, getting, let's say, reacquainted. Louis wasn't very welcoming. What have you done? I hissed. Suddenly the lights in the house went on in his eyes and the door melted into a face, head, and body. A shock wave of horrific memory rocketed through me, almost sending me to my knees. Tommy Taffy looked exactly how I had remembered him all those years ago. His short blonde hair, the small nub jutting from his face where his nose should have been, the eerie strip of seamless white where his teeth would have been, and his eyes, ever glowing blue eyes, so intense they threatened to drown my soul. His perfect, impossibly flawless skin gleamed in the light, reminding me of soft plastic. Tommy pulled the door open, gesturing inside with his hand. You came to see your sister, didn't you? From my place on the steps, I could see directly into the kitchen. Louis slumped on the floor, motionless by the table. Stephanie next to him, weeping, clutching at his still body. She looked forward and saw me, her eyes widening, desperation shaking her voice. Matt, help us, please, please. The agony stretched across her torn face, ripped at my heart. Tears blooming in my own eyes, I went to push past Tommy, but he grabbed my shoulders, stopping me. You saw your sister. No need to get involved, Matt, Tommy said, his grip like an iron clamp digging into my collarbone. I turned to Tommy, one foot in the house. Please leave them alone. Haven't you taken enough from our family? It's time for you to go, Matt, Tommy said, pushing me back outside. Stephanie wailed, screaming my name from beside her husband, Louis. I tried to step around Tommy, desperation raking my voice. Please just let me. I was cut off as Tommy suddenly stepped forward and grabbed me by the throat. He slammed me against the side of the house, never releasing his grip. His face only inches from mine, his voice like burning coals, but his face remained calm. I told you to go. Don't make it worse for them. This is about them, not you anymore, Matt. I gasped as he released me, slumping to my knees in the dewy grass. I watched, helpless as time Tommy went back inside, slamming the door in my face. The lights in the house went out, and then the screaming began. I sat in my dark apartment, the bottle of rum beside me almost empty as my gaze. The sun rising, a soft pink glow tickling the horizon through the window. I hadn't slept, my imagination running rampant. I couldn't let Stephanie live through this, not again, not for another 5 years. Time had hidden the abominations of our childhood from my sister. Tommy entering our lives at an age she could still forget. The twins. He had come back because of the twins, Jack and Jill, to continue his reign of terror through the generations of our family. When would it end? How could it end? The hours offered no solution, the rum burning in my gut giving no comfort. Suddenly my cell rang, startling me out of my stupor. I blinked and realized the sun was now burning cheerily through the windows. How long had I been catatonically sitting here? My heart jumped as I saw it was Stephanie calling me. I hurriedly answered. "Hello, Steph, are you okay? What was he? What has he done?" My sister's voice was emotionless and flat. Tommy said it was okay for you to come over for lunch, just like we planned. "What did he do to you?" I hissed. Her voice never changed. "He's feeding the twins. Everything is okay." "Steph," I started, but she hung up on me. I rose to my feet, rushed to the bathroom, splashing water over my face. The rum seemed to have no effect on me. My eyes meeting my face in the mirror with surprising clarity. But that did nothing to dilute the fear that plagued my mind. I raced out of my apartment and into my car. As I drove, I found myself becoming sick, claws dug in my memory and uprooting the past horrors I'd experienced at the hands of Tommy, Taffy. I couldn't let Jack and Jill go through that. I couldn't let Stephanie watch her family slowly get torn apart. A couple minutes later, and I was parking in front of her house. I anxiously got out of the car and went to the front door, where I knocked. Tommy answered, a baby in each arm. "Hello, Matt. So good to see you at a more appropriate hour. Come on in." Just seeing him touch the children made my skin crawl and my stomach clench, but I shut my mouth and said nothing. I walked past him and he kicked the door shut behind me, bouncing the babies in his arm and beaming down at them. "Ah, beautiful children, aren't they?" Tommy said softly, staring down into their faces. "Where's my sister? Where is she?" I asked, a trickle of sweat running down my spine like a ghost. As if to answer, Stephanie came walking down the stairs, skin pale and dark bags hung from her eyes. There was no sign of physical violence, but I knew that Tommy had other ways to punish people. "Lunch is ready," she said, tonelessly, her eyes dead. She walked into the kitchen and began setting food on the table. Followed her and then froze. Louis was slumped over the table, breathing heavily. One side of his face was swollen. Closing his left eye, blood leaked from his mouth onto the empty dinner plate before him. His legs sweeping in behind me, cooing it down at the babies. Stephanie, like a zombie, placing the steaming platters of food before us, and then sitting in the chair opposite her bleeding husband. Jesus, Lewis, I gasped. We need to get you some help. Come on, I'm taking you to the hospital. Tommy looked up at me from the babies. Matt, sit down and enjoy your food your sister so lovingly made for you. It would be terribly wasteful to ignore such a feast. As if to lead by example, Tommy took a place at the table, the gurgling, oblivious twins chirping in his arms. He needs help, Tommy, I insisted, terrified at the words coming out of my mouth. Now, don't be so dramatic, Matt. I suddenly slammed my hand down on the table. I'm taking him to the hospital, goddammit. Immediately I regretted my sudden aggression. The gasoline fire in my chest was doused instantly as Tommy's shining blue eyes met mine. Wordlessly, Tommy stood and handed Jill to Stephanie, who gratefully accepted her daughter. Eyes never leaving me, Tommy took Jack and went to the sink. He turned on the garbage disposal. Horror ripped through my brain like a blazing locomotive. The loud whirling of the blades filled the kitchen and choked the fight for me, replacing it with furious caution. Get away from there, Lois screamed, struggling to stand, but screaming as his broken legs squirmed against his twisted flesh. Tommy lowered the now crying Jack towards the black mouth of the garbage disposal, his eyes never leaving me. It would be a light, tight squeeze, but I think I could get him to fit, Tommy said, his voice like the edge of a knife. I raised a trembling hand. Stop, okay, please. Tommy, just stop. But Tommy kept lowering the baby, its howling face now inches from the opening. See, I only need one, Matt. Maybe you need a lesson. Maybe you've forgotten how this all works. Stephanie was clutching Jill, her eyes bulging from her face, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. No, look, Tommy, I'll do whatever you want. Please just stop, please. I got down on my knees, voice shaking, my own tears of horror pouring from my eyes. Just don't hurt the baby, don't hurt Jack. Tommy's eyes bore into my skull, examining my words like they were under a microscope. Finally, he turned and switched off the garbage disposal, handing Jack to Stephanie. I let out a shuddered sigh of relief and shakily got to my feet. Thank God Tommy took his seat at the table and pointed for me to do the same. I didn't hesitate. You godless fuck, Lewis growled, clenching his fists. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to fucking kill you. Tommy turned to him and I saw his jaw clench. Don't push me, Lewis. It won't end well. Fuck you, Lewis spat. Like lightning, Tommy stood and stepped towards Lewis, sliding his hand into the beaten man's mouth to grip his upper jaw. Without slowing, Tommy heaved Lewis out of his chair and threw him face first into the refrigerator. With a dull thud, Lewis's face erupted in a fountain of blood and splattered and shattered all his teeth as he collided with the hard surface. He slid to the floor, leaving bloody trails in his wake. Face like smooth as stone, Tommy lifted him by the hair and dragged him to the oven. He pulled the door down and shoved Lewis's head into the crack. Without hesitating, Tommy began to smash his skull between the oven and its door, each blow crunching voice thundering across the kitchen like a summer storm. "It's him or the baby. Who's it going to be?" I collapsed in my chair, eyes wide, entire body shaking. Tears poured from my eyes, my lips twisting, quivering to form words, but only helpless sobs escaped. The twins were howling, and Stephanie clutched them to her chest, weeping. Shock washed over her in horrified waves. I turned away, world rocking, ears filled with screaming, crying as Tommy crushed Lewis's head in the oven door. Spittle flew from my lips with each ragged breath I sucked into my lungs, reality bending and darkening. Tommy straightened, panting and observing his work. Blood splatter painted the cabinets and door. Slow trails that oozed like reaching fingers. Stephanie, hysterical, weeping eyes squeezed shut. Twins mimicking their mother's sorrow. Tommy ran a hand through his hair, exhaling, his eyes meeting mine. He smiled, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. And then he turned to Stephanie and motioned for the babies. "Give them to me. Clean your husband's mess up." My nails were digging into the tabletop, knuckles white. I couldn't believe the carnage I had just witnessed, the brutal execution of my brother-in-law. I was shaken to my core, my vision spinning in disbelief. I felt dizzy, lightheaded, sick. Tommy leaned down and snatched the babies from my sister. "Go, put him in the basement for now." Why did you do that?" Stephanie squeaked between sobs. Tommy began to soothe the twins, shooting a look at my sister. "He wasn't right for this family. Stephanie, now clean him up." Stephanie walked carefully up to her dead husband. I can't imagine what she was feeling right now. She crouched down to observe the damage. Tommy walked into the living room, motioning me to follow him. My chair scraped loudly against the floor as I stood watching my mentally shattered sister begin to drag her dead husband towards the basement. Drool leaked from her lips as she whispered loving apologies to the deceased. She was breaking, I knew it. In a horrific daze, I followed Tommy into the living room, feeling like I was in a dream, more of a nightmare. I wanted to murder this monster, rip this cancer from my family, but another part of me just knew I couldn't, that attempting to do so would just bring more violence. There just had to be a way. There had to be a way. Tommy had settled the twins and was now watching me. "You okay, Matt?" I said nothing. My shell-shocked eyes stared into nothingness. Tommy nodded. "I know, this is probably upsetting. That's why I wanted to talk to you in private. I'm worried about your sister and how she's going to take all this. I'm worried about how it will affect her parenting." My eyes rose to meet his, my voice incredulous. You did this." Tommy ignored my accusation. "Matt, I'd like you to stay here with us for a while. Keep an eye on your sister. Help her through this. I'm afraid it's the only chance we have of settling her mind after such a tragedy." My fists were clenched by my side. "One day someone is going to stop you." Tommy smiled, but there was no laugh. There was no humor at all. Careful, Matt. Just leave my sister alone. Get out of our life, I said through gritted teeth. I can't do that, Tommy insisted. Not with such beautiful children to be raised. In fact, that's the reason I'm here so early. I just couldn't wait any longer. I had to see them. His eyes glowed, twin spotlights cutting into the darkness of my mind. I took a step towards him, whispering, "What the fuck are you?" And there it was. That lamp. I stayed with the Stephanie that night. It had taken her almost 3 hours to clean up Lewis, and when she was finished, she went to her bedroom and collapsed. I put the babies to bed after giving them a bottle and stood on the balcony, staring down into the empty living room. Everything felt wrong, like I was dreaming. The shocking events that were slowly twisting my life dug into my brain, unearthing every horror I'd spent years burying, and rested on my shoulder. I turned to see Tommy, the light in my sister's bedroom glowing behind him. "Go be with her tonight. It's important she feels the warmth of a man beside her. It will help ease her husband's passing." I said nothing. I stared into Tommy's smooth face. Every ounce of me screamed to plunge my fingers deep into his eyes. Tommy pushed me towards Stephanie's bedroom. "Go." Wordlessly, I walked down the hall and into my sister's bedroom. I shut the door behind me and went to sit on the bed. Stephanie was under the covers, staring at the ceiling through bloodshot eyes, her skin pale. Heavy bags dripped down her cheeks. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I laid down next to her and turned off the lamp. After a couple hours, I blessedly heard the shallow breath of sleeping beside me. Good, I thought. Let her mind have a few hours of peace. The deep hours of the night sucked me up on me, but I barely even noticed. My mind refused to shut down. Ideas in possible ways out, circling my exhausted head like water circling a drain. Something Tommy said kept echoing in my mind. I only need one of them. I analyzed and examined those words over and over, wringing out every possible meaning and scenario they could represent. I didn't like what I found. I glanced at my sleeping sister next to me, her suffering apparent in her slumber. My heart screamed for her, and I felt my eyes well up. She didn't deserve this. Not again. Not for another 5 years. I couldn't watch that. I couldn't let it happen. What was I willing to do to save her? What kind of person would I have to as to cast a soft glow across his smiling face. I shivered and turned away. It was hours before I felt his gaze leave me. I awoke to a scream. I bolted upright, leaving me in an instant. I didn't remember falling asleep, but the dark gloom from the window told me it was late. I glanced at the clock on the bedside and saw it was almost 10. Rain threw itself against the house, a wind slamming angrily against the windows. Another scream shot me out of bed. It was Stephanie. I looked at the empty bed and my heart began to race. I sprinted out of the room into the hallway. Tommy was marching up the stairs, holding my sister by the hair. She was gasping for air and grasping at his wrist, tears running down her face in agony as he shook her, screaming down into her face. "When will you learn?" he howled, never slowing his pace. My heart crawled up to my throat and sickness boiled in my stomach. What happened? Tommy let her go. Still dragging my sister, Tommy ascended to the top of the stairs. He reached out and palmed my face, throwing me hard against the far wall. Stars exploded in my vision as my head bounced off the sheetrock, sending me to my knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wasn't calling anyone, I promise." Stephanie howled as Tommy pulled her towards her bedroom. "The police can't help you. Matt can't help you. Only I can help you," Tommy snarled. He threw her across the room onto the bed and turned back to me. Fury stretched his face and burned in his eyes. "Your sister needs another lesson," he growled before slamming the door and locking it. I crawled to my feet, racing to the door. I jiggled the handle and pounded on the wood. Screaming, begging from inside, I heard something crash, and then my sister's voice arced and rose, reaching an almost animalistic height of hysteria. "Tommy, stop. Stop, please. Tommy, leave her alone," I cried, slamming myself against the door. But the door didn't budge, and my sister began to howl. I spun in the hallway, clawing at my hair, eyes wide. Bok, 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 bok. My heart motored in my chest, and my whole body shook, a sense of maddening helplessness and anguish threatening to overwhelm me. "Stop this," my mind screamed. "You have to stop it." I pounded the wall, tears rolling down my face. No, 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 no. She still has a chance. She can recover from this plague. Do something before it's too late, my mind howled. Breath hitching in my throat, my sister's screaming echoed and crashing into my skull. I turned to the twins' room. I squeezed my fists together, world blurring through tear-soaked eyes, and went in. Jack and Jill were sniffling in their cribs, staring up at me with confused, scared expressions. I looked down at them, sobbing, placing my forehead against Jill's crib. "No, no, no, no," I wept. "Please, please, please." I righted myself and reached down, stroking her soft cheek. Snot bubbled from my nose, face a wet mess of agony and mental devastation. "I'm so sorry, little one," I whispered. Stephanie shrieks, collapsing my willpower. "But you can't understand the pain your mother is going through. What she will have to endure. I love you and Jack with all my heart, but I love my sister more." I picked up a pillow and placed it over the child's face. It took 48 seconds for Jill to die. Hoarse cries rattled my chest. Prayers of forgiveness poured from my lips. I went to Jack's crib and killed him as well. When it was over, I threw the pillow against the wall and slumped down to my knees, raining the floor with tears of horror of what I had just done. My mind cracked, ripping in two, bleeding sorrow and self-hatred through my body. Suddenly, something was hauling me to my feet. I coughed as a hand gripped my throat and slammed me against the wall. I blinked and stared through stricken eyes into Tommy's enraged face. "What have you done?" he bellowed, shaking. Through the misery, a deep, murderous hatred blazed in my chest like wildfire. I leaned into Tommy, voice like hot steel. "I'm bringing this family from your shadow." Screaming, I smashed my face into his as hard as I could. My vision blinked. The darkness quickly cleared under a storming rage. Tommy howled, stumbling backwards, clutching his face. Something yellow and thick dripped from his mouth. He looked down at it, eyes growing wide. "I knew you could bleed," I snarled, wiping the tears from my face. Tommy stared at his covered hand and then backed up at me, fury reigniting. "What have you done to the children?" "I killed your lifeline," I hissed. Before he could respond, I charged him. I threw my body into his, slamming him against the far wall with a heavy thud. The surprise and pain that rippled across his face fueled my sudden murderous hunger. I grabbed his hair and ripped his face to the side, burying my teeth into his soft throat. He screamed as my jaws snapped shut, my mouth filling with warmth and shredded flesh. I spat the mouthful out as Tommy shoved me back hard, and going to his gushing throat, his fingers coated with yellow liquid pouring down his shirt and chest. I didn't let him recover. I grabbed a lamp and brought it crashing into his skull, bringing him to his knees. I drove a fist under his chin while simultaneously swinging the lamp again, driving the butt directly into his eyes. He howled, falling against the wall, reaching out, desperate. I knelt over him, tossing the lamp aside. My fist thudded into the gaping hole in his throat, summoning new howls of agony. It fueled me, ignited me, filled me with rage. I stood and kicked him into his stomach over and over. He started to crawl towards the door, but I brought a foot down onto his spine, causing him to twist and shriek. Keeping my foot on his back, panting, I leaned down, voice like venom. "It's over, Tommy, motherfucker." Even through the obvious pain, his twisted eyes burning with hatred, his voice hoarse. "You can't kill me. There are other families." I reached down and gripped beneath his chin with both hands. "But not my family." I pulled back as hard as I could, muscles straining and screaming. Howling, thrashing, Tommy's neck bent until the skin in his throat split with a sickening pop. Pop, pop, pop. But I didn't stop, sweat pouring from my brow, fingers digging into his skin. With a deafening crack, Tommy's spine broke the base of his neck, and then he was still. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping, muscles burning. I stared at the motionless body, fresh tears in my eyes. I had done it. I had killed Tommy Taffy. A wave of relief and sorrow rolled through me like a rising tide. Hot and cold crashed into each other as the consequences of my actions stabbed me with needle-thin blades. What have you done? I rushed Stephanie to the hospital, calling the police on the way. I told them an intruder had broken into the house and murdered Lewis and the children. I didn't wait for the questions, my main concern getting my unconscious sister medical attention. I'll be able to live with myself much longer, but I know Stephanie will live, my dear sister. The news of her children's demise rocked her to the bone. I stayed with her through it all. Those long nights in the hospital filled with the overwhelming sadness and grief. I told her Tommy had killed them, and it's a lie I will take to my grave, whenever that may come. And even when the sorrow